Charlie Woods and Miles Russell, the golf story nobody saw coming the moment everything changed. Charlie Woods didn't destroy Miles Russell on a golf course. He didn't beat him. He didn't make him disappear. And there was no psychological battle between them. The truth is actually far more interesting. Charlie Woods was carrying Miles Russell's golf bag. And somehow, that simple detail turned into one of the most fascinating stories in amateur golf. Because on June 8, 2026, two 17-year-olds found themselves standing on one of golf's most brutal stages, the U.S. Open final qualifying at Ballyniles Country Club in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. One was trying to earn a place in his first major championship. The other had just missed his own chance to qualify. Instead of going home, Charlie Woods decided to help his friend. And what happened next changed the trajectory of Miles Russell's summer. Russell survived a 3-for-2 playoff and earned his ticket to the U.S. Open at Shinnecock Hills. Charlie Woods was right there beside him. Not as an opponent, not as a rival, as his caddy. And that distinction matters, because the original story circulating around this moment has the relationship completely backward. There was no Charlie versus Miles showdown. There was no evidence that Charlie psychologically broke Russell. There was no mysterious stare-down or silent battle between two teenagers. The real story is about friendship, pressure, trust, and two young golfers preparing for very different futures. And the ending? It was even more emotional than the beginning. Before we get there, make sure you subscribe, because this isn't just another story about Tiger Woods' son. It's a story about what happens when one young golfer gets an opportunity and another young golfer chooses to help him take it. Two names, one extraordinary generation. To understand why this moment mattered, you have to understand who Miles Russell actually is. Russell isn't simply another promising junior golfer. By 2026, he had already built one of the strongest junior resumes in the game. He became a two-time AJGA Rolex Junior Player of the Year, winning the award for the first time at just 15 years old, breaking a record previously held by Tiger Woods. He also became the first player to win the prestigious Junior Invitational at Sage Valley twice, doing it in consecutive years. And his resume wasn't limited to junior golf. At 15, Russell became the youngest player to make the cut on the Korn Ferry Tour and the youngest player to record a top 25 finish on a PGA Tour-sanctioned tour when he tied for 20th at the 2024 Lecom Suncoast Classic. So when Russell arrived at Ballyniles for U.S. Open final qualifying, he wasn't an unknown teenager hoping for a miracle. He was already one of the most closely watched amateurs in the world. The problem? Qualifying for the U.S. Open is brutally difficult. The 2026 final qualifying process featured 10 sites, with hundreds of players fighting for only a limited number of spots. At Ballyniles, Russell played 36 holes and finished at 6 under 138. That wasn't enough to comfortably walk away with a ticket. 3 players were tied for the final 2 spots: Russell, Ryder Cowan, Tyler Collett. And now the entire dream came down to a playoff. That's where Charlie Woods entered the story. Charlie Woods wasn't there to compete. Charlie Woods had narrowly missed advancing through his own U.S. Open qualifying route. But instead of disappearing from the scene, he stayed close to the action. Russell needed a caddy. Charlie stepped in. The two were already close friends, shared the same agent, and were both committed to play college golf at Florida State beginning in 2027. So this wasn't some publicity stunt. It was two teenagers who already knew each other deciding to help each other. And Russell later explained why having Charlie on the bag mattered. It kept things light. He wasn't constantly surrounded by another adult telling him what every shot meant. He had his friend beside him. Someone his own age. Someone who understood the pressure without making the pressure bigger. And that might have been exactly what Russell needed. Because when you're 17 years old and fighting for a place in the U.S. Open, the hardest opponent isn't always standing beside you. Sometimes it's the voice inside your own head. The playoff. Russell and Cowan survived. The playoff ended with both earning spots in the U.S. Open, while Collett missed out. And just like that, Miles Russell was going to Shinnecock Hills. A 17-year-old amateur had earned his place in one of golf's biggest championships. But notice what makes this story so unusual. Charlie Woods didn't qualify. Yet Charlie still became part of the journey. The son of a three-time US Open champion was suddenly carrying the bag for another teenager who was about to make his major debut. And the irony wasn't lost on anyone. Tiger Woods had spent decades competing at the highest level of the US Open. Now his son was helping another young golfer get there. That is a remarkable image by itself. But then came the next question. Would Charlie actually caddy for Russell at Shinnecock Hills? The decision nobody expected. At first, it seemed possible. Russell had clearly enjoyed having Charlie on the bag. The two had just survived one of the most stressful days of their young careers together. But when the US Open arrived, the plan changed. Russell announced that his swing coach, Ramon Bescansa, would carry his bag instead. And the reason was surprisingly simple: comfort. Bescansa had been Russell's regular caddy for many of his biggest events. Russell explained that the familiarity mattered. So Charlie wasn't going to walk the fairways at Shinnecock Hills. He had already played his part. And that decision tells us something important about Russell. When the moment became even bigger, he chose experience and familiarity over the headline. That isn't weakness. That's maturity. Then Miles walked into Shinnecock Hills. June 18th arrived. Russell walked onto the US Open stage alongside 54-year-old major champion Padraig Harrington. Think about that for a second. A teenager playing his first US Open, beside a player with decades of professional experience. And instead of looking overwhelmed, Russell competed. His opening round was a 72. Then he followed it with a 71. He made the cut. And suddenly the teenager who had needed a playoff just days earlier was still standing when many experienced professionals were already heading home. That alone was a story. But Russell's reaction to professional golf was perhaps even more revealing. He talked about how impressive professionals were because of how boring they could make golf look. That might sound strange, but it was actually an incredibly mature observation. The best players don't always look spectacular. They hit fairways. They find greens. They avoid disasters. They make difficult golf look ordinary. And Russell was watching all of it. Learning. Absorbing. Preparing. The numbers tell the real story. Russell ultimately finished tied for 39th at the 2026 US Open. His 4 rounds were, for a total of 287. That's 7 over par. And while a 39th place finish might not sound spectacular compared with the names at the top of the leaderboard, context changes everything. This was a 17-year-old amateur playing his first US Open. He made the cut. He completed all 4 rounds. And he finished ahead of numerous established professionals. The performance earned him a place in golf history and demonstrated why so many people had been watching his development. But there was one more moment waiting. And this one had nothing to do with Charlie Woods. It had everything to do with Miles Russell's father. The final hole. On Father's Day, Russell reached the 18th hole. His regular caddy, Ramon Bescansa, had been on his bag for virtually the entire tournament. But as Russell approached the final green, something special happened. Bescansa handed the bag to Russell's father, Joe. Russell had asked a USJ rules official earlier that morning whether he could make the switch. Permission was granted. Joe Russell hadn't even known exactly what was coming. Then father and son walked toward the 18th green together. For a 17-year-old making his US Open debut, it was an unforgettable ending. Russell later described it as a Father's Day gift. And suddenly, the story that began with Charlie Woods carrying his bag ended with his father carrying it. That's not a rivalry story. That's a story about people surrounding a young golfer as he takes his first enormous step into professional golf. And Charlie's story wasn't finished. While Russell was making the cut at Shinnecock Hills, Charlie Woods continued his own development. Charlie qualified for his 3rd consecutive U.S. Junior Amateur in 2026. And in July, his U.S. Junior Amateur run ended in dramatic fashion. Woods reached a playoff for the final match play spots at Saucon Valley Country Club. But after a camera click during his backswing, Charlie bogeyed the playoff hole and was eliminated. It was frustrating, but it also revealed something important. Charlie Woods isn't simply waiting for his father's legacy to hand him a career. He's competing through the same difficult qualifying systems as everyone else. Sometimes he succeeds, Sometimes he doesn't. And that's exactly what makes his development worth watching. The connection between Charlie and Miles. Now step back and look at the bigger picture. Charlie Woods and Miles Russell aren't enemies. They're future college teammates. They're both 17. They share an agent. They've already competed around the same junior golf world. And now they've experienced something very few teenagers ever will. One helped the other qualify for the US Open. Then the other walked into the championship and made the cut. That is a much more interesting relationship than the manufactured rivalry the internet sometimes wants. Because golf doesn't always produce stories through conflict. Sometimes the best stories come from friendship. From one teenager saying, "I'll carry your bag." From another teenager trusting him. From a playoff. From a major championship. And finally, from a father taking the bag for the last hole. What comes next? And this is where things get really interesting. Miles Russell is heading toward college golf at Florida State. Charlie Woods is heading there too. So the next chapter of this story won't be played out in a viral junior golf clip. It will unfold over an entire college career. They'll be teammates. They'll practice together. They'll compete together. And eventually, they'll have to compete against the best players in the world. Russell has already shown that he can survive professional-level pressure. Charlie has shown that he's willing to put in the work while carrying one of the most recognizable names in sports. Neither teenager needs to be declared the next Tiger Woods. Neither needs to be called the future of golf before they've even played college golf. They simply need time. And that's perhaps the most important lesson from everything that happened this summer. The real story. So, did Charlie Woods destroy Miles Russell? Did he psychologically break him? Absolutely not. The evidence tells a completely different story. Charlie Woods helped Miles Russell. He carried his bag when Russell needed him most. Russell survived a playoff. He qualified for his first US Open. He made the cut. He finished tied for 39th. And on the final hole, his father took over the bag for one unforgettable Father's Day moment. Meanwhile, Charlie continued his own journey, one that will eventually lead him and Russell to Florida State. And maybe years from now, people will look back at that June day at Balliniles and realize they were watching the beginning of something much bigger. Not a rivalry. Not a psychological war. A friendship between two young golfers standing at the doorway of the same sport. One day, Charlie Woods may have to compete against Miles Russell. And when that happens, the story will be very different. Because there won't be a bag between them. There won't be a friendship round. There won't be one carrying the other's clubs. There will simply be two golfers trying to beat the course. And when that day finally comes, remember where the story started. With one teenager missing his own opportunity. And choosing to stay behind for his friend. That may be the most important thing Charlie Woods did all summer. Not winning. Not making headlines. Not trying to prove he was his father's son. Just helping another young golfer take the next step. And sometimes, that's what greatness looks like before anybody recognizes it. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for more deep dives into the rising generation of golf. Because Charlie Woods and Miles Russell are only getting started.